Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I'm joined by Emma Campbell, better known to her Instagram followers as Limitless M, to discuss her separation stories, cancer struggles, and her passion for running. Emma starts by telling me how her parents' marriage, and in particular her relationship with her dad, shaped her own romantic life. We go on to discuss her relationship with the father of her 4 children, including triplets, and the difficult fertility journey. Emma shares her very personal take on how she found separation far more difficult than even her cancer diagnosis. We go on to talk about Emma's subsequent marriage and the trials and tribulations of a blended family, what made it special, and how it ultimately ended in divorce. Emma tells me why taking the time to feel pain and sadness is vital after a separation, and that it can't be rushed. Ever the optimist, she finishes our chat by discussing her passion for running and why she believes that physical activity can help you get through almost anything, from cancer to a breakup. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. It's really lovely to have you on the podcast. And today we're going to sort of talk about cancer struggles and divorce, what inspires you, and with the hope of bringing, I guess, some inspiration to other people going through divorce or cancer. Let's start at the beginning and tell us a little bit about your background, how you grew up, and what kind of relationships you experienced as you were growing up.
Yeah, so I was born in the 70s with an older sister and mum and dad who are both alive here, frail. My dad was 91 yesterday as we're talking today. My mum's nearly 88. So they're both incredible characters with a very strong sort of spirit and mindset, but their marriage was clearly never a match made in heaven. And I'm 7 years younger than my sister, so I have no recollection of kind of mum and dad being a loving couple. You know, they were very much kind of, it was quite not a volatile house. I think they're quite strong characters, but it was, my dad is very charismatic, a successful artist, scenic artist. My mum used to be an actress. So they met in the world of theatre, you know, so I'm sure, I don't know, but I'm sure it's probably quite a passionate, explosive love affair. Got married, had my sister, and, you know, we had a stable home. But in terms of my first sort of fundamental example of a relationship, it really wasn't ideal. My father moved out when I was sort of 9, 10, 10, 11, on that transition between primary and secondary school. I found that very, very difficult. I was incredibly attached to my dad in probably a way that went on to shape my adult relationships. He was kind of a very tough act to follow, and I think he has been on a pedestal for lots of us in some ways. And certainly as the youngest daughter, we had an incredibly close relationship, and I was a real kind of, you know, it sounds quite old fashioned now, but a real sort of daddy's girl, you know. And mum, again, in hindsight, is kind of heartbreaking in a way, because I look back and see what my mum now as an adult, I see how hard things must have been for her. He wasn't faithful particularly, you know, but because of his nature versus her nature, he was the one that we kind of gravitated towards. He was the protector, the steady, calm one, and mum was, I guess, holding things together. But very briefly, I think what it left me with was a very, very, not a negative view of relationships, but a very romantic, idealized view of relationships. So my dad was this kind of, you know, charming, handsome artist, reciting poetry and sonnets and talking about unrequited love being the most powerful love of all, and crying at what. And so we had this it was all very kind of out of reach. So I was incredibly romantic, but as a result, I think real life relationships eluded me because I think it was almost like men were another species. I didn't have a lot of normal examples other than my larger than life dad. Didn't have a brother, didn't have uncles, and I went to a single sex school. So it was very kind of, who are these creatures? Yeah. So I think that's been quite a big thing for me, really kind of trying to normalize relationships and realizing that they're many shades of color. They're not either perfect and Hollywood or a nightmare.
That really resonates with me because I think, I grew up at a similar time. I'm a child of the 70s as well. And I think as well, we didn't talk about it so much in those days. Like our view of romantic relationships was what you saw on the TV, Dallas and Dynasty and those sorts of things, which were all very volatile and passionate relationships and that kind of stuff. So, and like you, I idolized my dad. So I think it's a really important point you make, that the way that you grow up and the relationships that you witness at that very impressionable age do stay with you and do shape where you end up in your own relationship life, which is why it's so important to have, as you were saying, positive role models around you, isn't it? And people who can model good relationships.
And I was always drawn to the kind of what I saw as the picture perfect family. Like my best friend grew up in Yorkshire, and I'm still very close to their family. So their mum and dad, and it was all very seemed to me very solid and stable, and kind of, roast dinner every Sunday and all sitting down watching, almost like a Gogglebox family, kind of, if you think of the traditional kind. And we didn't really have that. And I always just craved I craved, normality, what I saw as a regular, normal, inverted commas, home life. And actually, of course, you look back and think, well, I wouldn't really change it, but I would. Some aspects, I think, have led to me finding relationships quite difficult.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because you're also known, aren't you, for having triplets who are now teenagers. I can't even begin to imagine. That must be fun and scary in equal measure. How did that relationship with their father come about, and what did that teach you in terms of your own understanding of how you behaved in relationships?
Yeah, they've also got a big brother. So I've got 4 children with their dad. So my eldest son is heading towards 22 in a few months. So we met. I didn't have, just, I guess, following on from what we just talked about, in my 20s, I didn't really have a lot of relationships. I would tend to fall for unavailable men. So it would be very kind of quite adolescent, really, I think, in my emotional and mental state. Again, the man that was out of reach, possibly kind of going back to my dad. And it would take me a long, long time to get over any brief relationship. It was always quite tormented, and there was no sense of self. I think I just gave myself over emotionally. And when I was sort of 29, 30, I met their dad. I'd been traveling on my own. I'd had my little kind of, I'm going to step into being a grown up, and did some traveling on my own. And I was really trying to push myself out there more. I'd kept my world quite safe, I think. And I met their father. I was writing, before laptops, I would sit in the local cafe in Clapham, a French cafe, and I would go regularly 3 or 4 times a week with my probably, like, pretending to be Carrie Bradshaw, even though I wasn't watching Sex and the City at that point, but with my notebook and my hot chocolate, or, occasional little glass of wine, and I would write. And, it was quite a fruitful, creative time. And this very handsome Frenchman was working in the cafe, and he was a very successful, flirty, charismatic waiter. And we just got chatting one day, and I look back now, and I've got 4 beautiful children, but there were lots of positives to the relationship. But if I hadn't been so inexperienced, I've always said about that relationship, it's probably the relationship I should have had when I was 19 or 20, a wonderful couple of years with a gorgeous Parisian, but maybe not the person to kind of bed down with and make a life with. Lots of instability, lots of huge financial employment inconsistencies. And when I had my eldest son, I got a flesh-eating bug. So we had a very instant stress. I got pregnant within a few months. It was all on fast forward, all kind of, this is it, we're in love. He moved in, I got pregnant. Everyone was kind of, oh, wow, this is a bit quick, but there wasn't really that measured thinking. Had no idea what a red, and without talking disrespectfully about him, I had no idea what a red flag was at that point, or a kind of, oh, there's just maybe, So I had Jake, got very ill, recovered from that, but immediately we were we'd been through quite a lot in a short space of time. And we were that classic, when we were great, we were great. And when it was awful, it was crossing a lot of lines that weren't particularly safe or healthy. And then kicked in the sort of desire to complete our family. and for me, to have one more baby. And that was became an all-consuming drive for me. Recurrent miscarriages, that infertility nightmare that if anyone's been through it, it takes over.
It does take over, doesn't it? It becomes an absolute obsession. I had a similar thing as well, where you've had one, you want the second one, and exactly the same. I had recurrent miscarriage, and it's incredibly. It just takes over your life, doesn't it? It becomes absolutely everything.
It really did take over my life, and I really can recognise now the pressure that put on our relationship and on him, because he was supportive, and of course he wanted on paper another baby, but I was driving it, and I now really, that was a stressful, and also that all-consuming desire blocks out affects your decision making. We'd go through a bad phase, and people would say, "Well, are you sure about this? You two aren't great." And it's like, I've described it many, many times. It's almost like my womb was sort of bullying me. It was like I just couldn't fight that feeling, and it was almost like I just want my other baby, and it wasn't give me a baby, but it was like my idea of what I thought a family was. I think everyone has their different vision of a family. And for me, mine was, and I described it in my first book, mine was square shaped. It was like mum, dad, 2 kids.
2 children. Yeah, same with me. Exactly the same. I was just obsessed with not having an only child, and even in some ways, the pressure of that relationship was making me think, well, if something does go wrong, then I don't want to have just one child, because they'll need a sibling to be able to help them cope with this. And so your mind is going to all kinds of really bizarre places when you're stuck in that hormonal trap.
Yeah, and it's comforting for you to say that, because I still continue to carry guilt about the repercussions of that pursuit. So we embarked on one round of IVF, again, led by me, and lo and behold, I won't go into all the milestones of only finding out we were having triplets at the 20-week scan, but that's how it went. So, we were living in a 2-bedroom flat, kind of pressure was on, but obviously wanted, this pregnancy then was high risk, lots of hugely stressful pregnancy, and our relationship really did begin to deteriorate in quite a volatile and really not great way. So by the time the babies were born, it was, even though I'd wanted this, I needed, suddenly something else kicks in, and your own emotional and physical safety and the well-being of everyone, and particularly of our eldest son, at an age where he was starting to become aware of some of what was happening. So that was the first relationship, and then literally within a few weeks of him moving out, I got my breast cancer diagnosis. So overnight, and if I think of Jake particularly, mum, dad, 1 child, suddenly 3 babies, suddenly papa leaves, suddenly mum's got quite invasive breast cancer. So it's very hard to remove the soap opera element to my life at that phase, at that stage, and that kind of continued for a very long time. And we weren't married, and there was no major financial, we didn't have a property together, but the personality aspects and the volatility and the drama was very, very consistently high for a very long time. And that was incredibly stressful and had a very detrimental effect on my mental health. And I'm sure his, but unfortunately we weren't able to handle it in a adult, calm, measured way. It just became more and more dramatic, and to a point where 4 years on, so just as I was heading to that kind of, it was 4 years post-diagnosis, physically doing well, there was actually unfortunately had to go to court, and there was a restraining order put in place. So yeah, I'll kind of leave that there as a top line.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly tough things to have to cope with. And you've just, in the sort of space of a minute, talked about incredible list of traumas. Like you say, you've had the difficulty of going from being a small, compact unit to having an extended family overnight, which in anyone's book must be incredibly challenging. You've then, as you said, decided to go your separate ways. So you're going through what most people would consider to be one of the most stressful events of their lives, separation or divorce. And then you've got your cancer diagnosis. And then you've got somebody who's not playing ball and going through a court experience. Such a lot in that to unpack.
Yeah, and the difficult thing is that he, even though we must have both known that, we were in a state of kind of emotional carnage, he very strongly was like, we have to make this work. We have this is what you wanted. I went along with that. We've got these babies. They're our babies. We love them. We have to make this work. And the enormous sense of head versus, of course he's right. I felt the shame and the guilt I felt, but there was just a fundamental kind of I can't function. I can't stay upright to feed these babies with this drama, let alone get through cancer. And I'm really mindful of, he didn't want the relationship to end, but unfortunately the actions that took place meant that it had to. I think that's a kind of, and it's so heartbreaking. And, my kids haven't seen their biological dad for 10, 11 years. My eldest son hasn't, and the younger ones obviously have much fewer memories, but it's in a box currently that occasionally gets opened with a conversation, but it's a kind of pretty stagnant, unchanged. It's there bubbling away all the time, but it's in a very, again, it could sound very selfish, but the relief for me, once I knew that I had my kind of emotion, my safety in place, and I could just focus on being the mum, being the single mum, getting them into the new school routine, focusing on what that point was my good health. I can't tell you, it was like the relief. I'd carried that weight for years, really, of just holding it all together and being in survival mode.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We're always encouraged now, aren't we, to be amicable and to, make sure that children have relationships with both parents. But you're making a really valuable point, and sometimes it is not safe or possible for that to happen. And we should always hang on to, for some of us, it's not safe or possible. And therefore, you have to transcend the guilt that you feel, because you have to do what's in everyone's best interests ultimately. And it is a really tricky balance. And sometimes I feel it's one of those things that gets swept under the carpet quite a bit as we talk about trying to stay amicable and doing the right thing for the kids and everything else. It's a tricky one. It's a very difficult balance to know where that line is. And ultimately, you sometimes have to make a digital decision, which is there's a relationship or there isn't.
And it got to the point, because I was so kind of bombarded with feelings of being told that I was making the wrong decision and feeling like so conflicted, even though there were so many arrows pointing to it only ending one way. But ultimately, the decision got taken out of my hands, by sort of legal things. And that came with a huge amount of, but I didn't want it to get like this. I didn't want it to get to this point, but it was like, this is not your decision now. So I guess that was a point where, and everyone around me, my poor, friends and family who were drained, but, who obviously had to kind of hold me up emotionally and help, were like, it was very clear, when you're constantly seeking reassurance and perspective from those closest to you, there was no shadow of a doubt that this couldn't go on.
And so tell us what happened then. So you're now a single parent, you're recovering from cancer. I've heard you say before that the separation side of things was worse than the cancer, and that's certainly borne out with stress inventories and various other statistics that get banded around that say actually separating and divorcing are worse than a cancer diagnosis.
I think it's an interesting one. It's a big old conversation, because I think there have certainly been chapters. And so, just to answer your initial question, so that all came to a legal conclusion in 2010. No, sorry, 2014. I was diagnosed in 2010. At the end of 2014, it came to a legal conclusion. And then I got a secondary diagnosis at the end of 2014, just as I met the person who then became my husband. And so that was a whole kind of new start potentially. But I do think the emotional fallout from whether it's marriage, separation is, I'm not going to lightly say that much is worse than a cancer diagnosis, but I think there's certainly been times of despair that have felt more painful than it might, but that's me based on my experience. So despite having been told I've got cancer 3 times, and despite being a lifelong patient, and despite the darkest stages, certainly the fear of not being here, the fear of leaving, the stakes were so high and remain so high ever since. But I have to also recognize the incredible privilege of not having at this point been told you need to get your affairs in order, or your prognosis is very poor. By some miracle, I'm still here, and I'm still responding well to treatment and currently in remission. So therefore, whereas I think when a relationship that with someone that you love very deeply ends, and it's not your choice, for me, my experience was the plummet into despair and hopelessness. So I think then that hopelessness can feel, I think I've always had some kind of, with the health stuff, it's like as soon as the devastation of a diagnosis would come, but as soon as there was a plan, it would always be, right, but the sun's going to come out again. There's light at the end of the tunnel. I've got to get through this year. I've got to get through that surgery. I've got to adjust to the new chemotherapy. But I have done, and I did. And the support and doctors and oncologists saying, it's okay. We know what to do with this. You're going to come through this bump. And again, that's my experience. And that's how it's been, many, many really frightening moments, but so far I've come through each one stronger than ever in some ways. And I think when the heart's involved, I think that's where I sort of worked out about a year after my marriage ended, what I couldn't work out why I felt so, I just was so stuck and I couldn't move on, and it was because I plummeted into that absolutely hopeless phase that just I remained in for a very long time. And I think that's where you then tip into a real depression, because I couldn't muster up or connect with any, right, I just got to roll my sleeves up and get through this tough patch. I couldn't see the tough patch ending. I just couldn't, as you can't ever imagine, for all the cliches, all the lines, but when you're in it, you just don't believe it, do you, that you'll come through and that you will be able to make sense of things.
Yeah. I think it's really difficult, as you say, sometimes to see the light at the end of the tunnel, because nobody tells you what the tunnel looks like or how long it is, do they? Like, there are stages to cancer, there or other difficulties, there are process you go through. But with this, it just seems to go on, and it can have new twists and turns thrown into it depending on someone else's emotional state or decision making. And I think that's what makes you feel so out of control, is that you have no sense of what the journey looks like even. And then it's really difficult, because how long do you have to keep trying for before you get something positive back? I think that's part of the despair that you talk about. And it feels very endless sometimes as well. So I can totally understand that. But you did turn this around, and I don't want to gloss over how hard it was, but something in you obviously got to a point where you felt another level of optimism and you felt that you could carry on and continue. So can you tell us a bit about what changed and what turned it around for you? You went through this despairing time, but you obviously then were in a place where you could meet somebody else. Things had got better. Was it just the conclusion of the legal side of the old relationship, or did you sense a change in yourself? Because I guess it would have been easy with a secondary cancer diagnosis at that point just to want to give up and say, "Oh, look, enough is enough. I've battled, but, I'm done."
No, I think that's what made that next relationship so, what's the word, it's profound, or kind of gave it so much weight, emotional weight from day one, because we connected as I literally connected online virtually a couple of weeks before I found out that I had stage 4. I had secondary breast cancer, and we met very shortly after that diagnosis. So again, got to go back. You could go back if we had longer to the little me who couldn't. It was like a fairy tale. It was like, I always described it as a sliding doors moment, where for me the narrative, and I've worked so hard and I am now to change that narrative, but the narrative at that point for me, so deeply embedded, was no one's ever going to be really, who would want to choose someone who's got loads of kids, multiples, and who's had cancer, and now the cancer's come back. That's it. It's done for me. My life will be a loveless, life. And so the miracle of this person coming in with a very open heart, and very, I think at that point, very, very kind of, we both absolutely believed that we could make this something wonderful. But again, it moved very, very, very quickly. And I think based on both of our situations, if we'd both been different people with different histories, maybe we would have been a bit more measured, but it just moved at the speed of light. And I think people around us, me, were so happy to see me find some joy. It was like this person had appeared just at the moment where that door might be closed forever. And so we embarked on a relationship, engagement, got married, became a family. And then I got another diagnosis, a few years into, I got that third diagnosis 3 years after we got married. So the challenges and the stresses continued. Lots and lots and lots of factors. Being a step parent, I would never diminish what a role that is. I wasn't an active step parent to his child because they were an adult. So I didn't have to, there was no sleepovers or whereas, he came in with his sleeves rolled up. But it's a very nuanced kind of situation, but there was a deep love there, but fundamentally, which I thought would carry us through anything, because of the way it was like, but we're us. We look at our story. Our story almost became kind of bigger than everything, and I just naively thought that would see us through, and obviously I was wrong. So that's, I think, why the aftermath was so agonizing in a very, very different way to the kid's dad, where it was less heartbreak, if I'm honest. There was grief and there was heartbreak, but it was more trauma relief, please, kind of wanting to be left alone to just focus on the other crucial issues, whereas this was a kind of absolute shattering of what one imagined.
So let's just recap then quickly. So you introduced your sort of new husband essentially into a family. How old were your kids when that was happening?
So when we first got together, they would just turn 5. We became a family under one roof about a year later. So, and my eldest son was 12, 13. And so for the younger ones, he very much became
their dad. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, there was certain points where he was called that. And that was, for a period of time, that's how it felt. And then I think the challenges sort of outweighed maybe the bond didn't deepen in a way it might have done in other set of circumstances.
Do you think this is about what was going on, about the fact that you were having to blend a family, or a combination of things? Or do you ever sort of try and unpick what did for it, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I think we know it is a hard one to talk about. It's a hard to kind of go into too much detail just for obvious reasons, really. But I think I kind of, I suppose, reiterating that feeling of that there were issues on both sides. For me, there was our parenting styles were completely different. I was still carrying this feeling of this was the miracle happy ending, but I'm still probably going to die. This all needs to be perfect. They all need to be bonded, and it all needs to be, and let alone you're dealing with multiples as well, who all got very, there were behavioural challenges. There was very little kind of respite for us as a couple. So it really was from 0 to 100. And I had the kind of vision of, look, let's just keep getting through this difficult first year, 2 years, 3 years. It'll all be worth it. They love you. I think you love them. I don't know, and then other factors came in on both sides where, he made a big positive life decision that kind of changed the course of his work and his focus. And then that really, I think, was the beginning of a further, something that initially seemed like a very positive step. Actually, I guess, sort of inevitably, it eventually, sadly, kind of created more of a divide and less of a tolerance of family. I think we changed. I think the people we were when we met, for lots of reasons, we morphed, and maybe his transformation happened sooner than mine. And then he needed to find his way. I'm probably sounding quite cryptic. I'm sorry. It's
Well, no, it sounds like, you're at different life stages. You were making decisions slightly independently of each other, and those decisions ultimately didn't bring you together, and there wasn't a sense of growth, but there was a sense of growth apart rather than growth together. I think that probably describes for lots of people why many marriages end, where there isn't something big and dramatic like in your first kind of relationship. There wasn't the sort of passion and the trauma, but like you say, it was probably as deeply, if not more deeply felt, because there was a sense of huge sadness and disappointment.
I was more deeply felt in a very different, because the love was so, certainly there was a huge amount of love there. And because it wasn't, that was, remains still, I guess, to be completely honest. I think, I still haven't fully, I'm in a really good place. I've really come through it. It's been 3 years now since we split up, 2 years since the divorce, but it took me a painfully long time. And then again, me, the kind of, what's wrong with me? Why is it taking me so long? That person's moved on. Everyone else is like willing me to move on. And I think going back to that, but it wasn't meant, I couldn't make sense of it. It wasn't meant to end this way. That was the feeling. It's like, it wasn't meant to look it. And it felt, how could something that started in the way it did, with such depth of feeling? And I really, again, naively, I've learned so much in the last couple of years, honestly, as a result, and how I now view relationships and things. But it's, the naive part of me thought we had gone through so much individually and together and as a family, that the part of me that's quite comfortably in denial thought that we just needed to get through these tricky bits, when actually, slowly but surely, the kind of distance and the lack of communication and the lack of closeness, and then children, growing into different phases.
And it sounds like, I get this sense of you wanting the vision and feeling like, and I do this all the time, if I can just get there, then it'll be okay. And then that's when I will be my happy, enjoyable self. And sometimes when we're doing that, we're forgetting that it's the journey that's the point, isn't it? And everybody says it, but it's so hard to appreciate that when you are desperately going after something that you want to make right. And I guess when you've got children as well, in that respect, you're trying to do it for them as much as anything, aren't you? It sounds like you wanted to get them into a place where if something happened to you, they've got another parent, they've got someone that they can rely on and be close to. And that must have put a huge amount of pressure, and it must have been very frightening.
Yeah, and it's certainly, when the marriage ended, it certainly brought up all those feelings that I had been working on, of panic, and that we're back, I suppose, maybe what's led to me as a mum, I really do strongly believe that there's dysfunction in every family. I really do. So as we get older and we have that self-awareness, hopefully, and that, so it's not about labeling my family as particularly dysfunctional, but it's like, I think I've always felt, and in so many ways, I feel like one of the luckiest people I know in terms of, my own health, my kids' health, the fact that we are all here and there's a level of stability and security, and there's lots of healthy aspects to our life. I mean, I've always felt like, as much as I've got wonderful girlfriends and wonderful friendships, it's quite frustrating when you seem to always be the one who's got oh yeah, but she's got this, and then and it's like, so then I overcompensate as a mum, and then I'm kind of, not very good with the boundaries, and I'm trying to make up for what they, I project hugely onto them in terms of the absence of a father figure, and less so with my son, because I think he's an adult now, and I think he's processing it in a different way, and he's at a point where he can make choices about what he wants to do. But certainly at this pivotal point with the younger ones, and it's three different individuals with three different personalities, three different relationships with that person who's no longer there. One daughter whose the impact of an absent father is different on a daughter than a son. One son is particularly sporty, so I know craves the kind of football dad kind of sideline thing. And if I could help myself, and probably then as a result would help them, I would just kind of drop my shoulders, trust it. But instead it's like, this kind of, and I'm working so hard to kind of to exhale occasionally. And because the weight of responsibility is enormous, and I probably make it harder, but the emotional weight of responsibility I feel every single day, especially at this point, they're 15, and, we really are in that kind of, they're out in the world more. I'm finding it incredibly challenging at the moment to just not kind of crumble, despite all the good things that are happening in life, not crumble at the weight of, I've got to keep these 3/4 people mentally, emotionally on track, get them through school. And I'm certainly as we speak today, I'm finding it, I'm loving my freedom.
You've got higher expectations than me. I just concentrate keeping mine alive at the moment, living in London with a 16-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, both with their own different issues and problems. I just find it completely overwhelming. And it's not something that, no matter how many good friends or what a lovely family you've got, and it sounds like you've got both, and I feel like I've got both, it's the absence of another parent who cares about your children in exactly the same way you do that creates the stress and the pressure of it. And there's no amount of friendship or loving family that can take off that pressure from your shoulders. You have to just bear it and get on. And it is exhausting. So I see you and I feel your pain. I understand that part of it.
Thank you. And one thing I know we're talking a lot, but one thing that I think other people listening might resonate with, I've realized over the years, in these challenging moments, in these moments of feeling this kind of what I'm carrying is, and I think then that's affected my kind of style of parenting, or kind of almost feel like I'm not parenting them sometimes, just letting them exist and just getting through each day. But the feeling has been, I need to love them to make up for the areas where there isn't that source of love.
You've got to do twice as much love, haven't you, to compensate? Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't always the healthiest thing, because it blurs the kind of the judgment and anyways. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you are coping. And one of the things I know that's been very important to you, and as we touched on at the beginning, was the running, and the fact that you're doing this year's London Marathon, that you do the Cancer Research Race for Life every year. Is that what has kept you going?
You know what? I've got so much to sort of say generally about running, and briefly for this chat, I think running has been, I talked about this yesterday, running is like the kind of, in a way running is almost like the partner that's always going to be there, is the stable, healthy attachment person in your life, or relationship, in your life. Running is a relationship, not a person. That actually, and I'm the inconsistent one. So for example, kind of when I'm in the flow of running and it's filling me up, like I'm now training for the marathon, I'm getting so much joy from my runs. I'm getting lovely, regular endorphin boosts and euphoric moments and clarity and pride and God, look how far I've come as I'm running very slowly, around the park. Because it's never about the speed. It's always about just getting out there and the benefits for my head. But it's interesting, the times when I've probably needed it the most, say, for example, going through the heartbreak, I wasn't able to run because there have been times where I've abandoned running probably when I needed it most because of that dark despair. But then ironically, when I really discovered running in 2019 was the year that I got another diagnosis and I was facing a very tough year physically. And actually, that was an incredible parallel alongside a difficult year because it gave me a whole new sort of appreciation and relationship with my body.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Just that if you can, as you say, you can become more athletic during a time when other bits of your body are letting you down. It's that balance, isn't it? Because I think that running, and I walk now rather than run because I had a problem with my hip a few years ago. But that when you have to change the relationship with your body as you age or as you become ill, it's a big psychological impact because I don't think I had appreciated until my hip didn't work that I actually put quite a lot of store in my athletic ability. It was a big part of my identity and who I was. I had run for all of my life. I had been good at running. And then to not be able to do that and have to find an alternative and one that's not quite as youthful or sexy just was a really big adjustment for me psychologically. So I can imagine, without wishing to kind of impersonate your experience, I can imagine that when something else goes wrong inside, to create a new relationship with something that's going right from a physical perspective must be actually a very sort of positive way of dealing with this kind of stuff.
It really was. And actually, I'm always grateful that I've never seen my body as letting me down, but I have been terrified of my body. Like there was a long period of time where I didn't run because I thought somehow, this was years ago, but when I've been in, periods of remission thinking, what if it wakes the cancer up? I mean, that was kind of how my brain was working. It's like I was scared of almost, what if I jolt it awake? And thankfully I managed to reframe that. But I think rather than seeing it as for me, it was less about seeing my body as letting me down, but more being terrified of it. And actually what running gave me was an amazing ability, a really helpful ability to recognize all the parts of my body from the top of my head to the tips of my toes that weren't cancer and never would be. And that, again, the kind of, my legs aren't cancer, my arms aren't cancer, my heart isn't cancer, none of that's cancer. And whatever might be going on, and we know, I'm not being naive, we know that one rogue cell can cause, I'm not pretending, but it helped me be able to just visualize and sort of shrink the impact it was having on my life, and it just helped me put it somewhere that was less all-consuming.
Amazing. And who are you running for in the marathon this year?
So this will be my third marathon, and I was absolutely adamant I would never run another marathon, but my lovely, very special friend, Dame Deborah James, who died in 2022, and I'm sure most people know she set up the Balbabe Fund, which has gone on to raise the most extraordinary amount. So I'm part of Team Balbabe, along with her brother, sister, one of her best friends, and others. And so I'm running for the Balbabe Fund and Cancer Research UK. So they're kind of, it's a collective. So Balbabe Fund raises money for CR UK. So that's certainly my very clear why, my very clear purpose. And even though training hasn't been easy and I probably haven't done enough of it, I'm still I feel very, very lucky that I'm in a physical position to be able to do it. And, and again, and I think touching on the subject of this podcast, I think, post, whether it's heartbreak, whether it's any kind of recovery, the feeling when you find yourself, and everyone says it, just you wait, one day you'll realize that you wake up and you're not thinking about that person, or one day you'll forget that you didn't have any hair 3 years ago, and we're all going, honestly, I won't be that person. This is me forever. But there were 2 or 3 runs that I had, post divorce, post that bleakest time where I felt like almost like off the charts kind of elation at realizing that I'd survived and I'd come through it. Not only did I come through it, but here I was running and smiling and feeling great and feeling optimistic. But I would say to anyone listening, if you're not there, oh my goodness, there's so much I could say about allowing yourself the time, and you cannot leapfrog those painful emotions. You cannot skip them, because if you do, they're going to come back. And they still come back now and blindside us, don't they? Unexpectedly, there'll be something that takes our breath away, a memory or a time or a smell or a trigger. But I think it's really important, if you're in those early phases of pain, confusion, heartbreak, or whatever it might be, choose to be around people who aren't trying to speed you along, that aren't trying to hurry you along. Because I had, from the best intentions, I had a little bit of, I could, understandably, people want the best for you. They want you to be feeling better. But the kind of, come on, it's been 6 months, it's been 3 months. It's like, sorry, it doesn't work like that. I had to take as long as I took. And the one thing I know is that I didn't skip a moment of the pain, because I couldn't. I had nowhere to run, literally. I had nowhere to go. I wasn't numbing it with stuff. I wasn't getting into other bad habits. I just had to sit through the agony, and it was agony. But yeah, I have come out the other side more or less most of the time.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? You're a testament to the fact that you survive, you come out the other side, you come out changed, but you can do it. And you must be the world's most inspiring person in terms of the number of things you've had to sort of contend with all in a very short space of time. But it's been fascinating just listening to the fact that there are no shortcuts. That's what I love about what you've said. There are no shortcuts. Nobody can hurry you through it. You have to take your time, but you will come out and you will not just survive, but thrive. So thank you, Emma, for sharing your story. It is an inspirational story, and one that we could have sat here for another 2 hours and still not really done it justice. So thank you very much indeed for joining me. If you've piqued their interest and they don't already know, where can people find more information about you, Emma?
So absolutely on Instagram, limitless_M, limitless M, my website, limitlessm.com, my podcast, Open, with Emma Campbell. And yeah, I guess I'm always happy to hear from people and get messages, and I love connecting. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find, I think, these days.
Fabulous. And if people want to donate and share the love through the London Marathon, how can they sponsor you?
Well, I could possibly ask you to share the link, maybe in your show notes, but it would be on my Instagram bio. I'm terrible. It is Just Giving. It's a Just Giving page, I guess, under my name, Emma Campbell, Balbabe Fund.
Thanks, Emma, very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. If you're listening to this and you'd like more information about how to separate or co-parent amicably, then please visit us at amicable.co.uk, where you can explore resources, or you can book a free advice consultation as well. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn or hear about new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates at thedivorcepodcast.com or on your favorite listening platform. Finally, we'd love to know how we can help you further. So do get in touch and share any questions about divorce, separation, or co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. And you never know, they might be the topic of future discussions. Thanks very much, Emma, for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for listening.